The bullet that killed Lucas Whitmore's wife had been meant for him, and that knowledge sat like a stone in his chest every morning when he woke to an empty bed in their ranch house outside Clifton, Arizona. 3 years had passed since that October day in 1881, when cattle rustlers had opened fire during what should have been a routine cattle drive. 3 years since he had held Margaret's hand as the light faded from her eyes. 3 years since he had buried the only woman he had ever loved on the hill overlooking the Gila River. Now, in the spring of 1884, Lucas went through the motions of living without actually feeling alive, tending his cattle with mechanical precision, eating meals that tasted like ash, and watching the sun rise and set with the same blank indifference. The ranch that had once been filled with Margaret's laughter and the promise of children running through the fields now stood as silent as a tomb. Lucas was 32 years old, though the lines around his eyes and the weariness in his shoulders made him look a decade older. His hands still knew how to rope cattle and mend fences. His body still rose before dawn to tend the livestock, but his heart had stopped beating the day Margaret died. The other ranchers in the area had stopped inviting him to social gatherings, stopped trying to set him up with available women, stopped expecting anything from him except the bare minimum of neighborly interaction. He preferred it that way. The isolation suited him, matched the emptiness inside. On a Tuesday morning in late April, Lucas was checking the fence line along his eastern property when he heard the sound of a wagon wheel breaking, followed by a woman's frustrated cry. He sat atop his horse, debating whether to investigate or simply ride on. The old Lucas, the one who had existed before Margaret's death, would have ridden immediately to help. This version of himself considered turning back toward the ranch house. But something, perhaps the last shred of the man he used to be, urged his horse forward. Around the bend in the dusty road, he found a covered wagon tilted at an awkward angle, its front right wheel shattered beyond repair. A woman stood beside it, her traveling dress dusty from the road, dark hair escaping from pins that had long ago lost their battle with the Arizona wind. She was struggling to unhitch the two horses from the wagon, speaking to them in a soothing voice that suggested she knew her way around animals. She had not yet noticed Lucas's approach. "Wheels broken," Lucas said, his voice rough from disuse. He rarely spoke to anyone these days beyond what was absolutely necessary. The woman spun around, her hand flying to her chest. In the bright afternoon sun, Lucas could see she was younger than he had first thought, probably in her mid-20s, with green eyes that held a mixture of frustration and determination. She was pretty in an understated way, with a sprinkling of freckles across her nose and a strong jawline that suggested stubbornness. "I can see that," she replied, her voice carrying a slight accent he could not quite place. "Eastern, perhaps." "I hit a rock in the road that I did not see until it was too late." Lucas dismounted and walked over to examine the damage. The wheel was completely destroyed, the wooden spokes shattered like matchsticks. "You are not going anywhere with this wagon," he said. "Nearest town is Clifton, about 5 miles south." "Where were you headed?" The woman wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of dirt. "Clifton, actually. I inherited a property there from my uncle. I am Kathleen Edwards." "Lucas Whitmore," he said, the introduction feeling strange on his tongue. He could not remember the last time he had introduced himself to anyone. "I have a ranch about 2 miles from here. I can take you into town, help you arrange for someone to fix or replace the wheel." Kathleen looked at him with those sharp green eyes, clearly assessing whether he could be trusted. Lucas waited with the patience of a man who had nothing but time. Finally, she nodded. "I would appreciate that, Mr. Whitmore. My belongings are in the wagon. I cannot leave them here unattended." Lucas surveyed the wagon, calculating. "We can take what is most valuable with us now, come back for the rest with a proper wagon, unless you have someone in Clifton who can help." "I have never been to Clifton," Kathleen admitted. "I have never even been to Arizona. I was living in Philadelphia until 3 weeks ago. My uncle passed away and left me his property. I sold everything I had to make the journey west." Something in her voice caught Lucas's attention. There was a story there, layers of meaning beneath the simple words. He recognized the tone because he heard it in his own voice when he spoke of the past, that careful flatness that came from trying not to feel too much. "Philadelphia is a long way from Arizona," Lucas said. "This country is not easy, especially for someone alone." Kathleen's chin lifted slightly, that stubborn jaw setting in a way that told Lucas she had heard variations of this warning before. "I am stronger than I look, Mr. Whitmore. I would not have come if I could not handle it." Lucas almost smiled, catching himself before the unfamiliar expression could fully form. "I did not say you could not handle it. I said it was not easy. There is a difference." He moved to the back of the wagon. "Show me what needs to come with us." They worked together in practical silence, Kathleen pointing out a trunk of clothes, a box of documents, and a smaller case that she handled with particular care. Lucas tied what he could to his horse and fashioned a makeshift sling for the rest. Kathleen's 2 horses were sound, and she proved herself capable of riding one while leading the other. They left the wagon by the side of the road, and Lucas made a mental note of the location so he could return with help. The ride to Clifton took just over an hour. Kathleen sat her horse well, moving with it rather than against it, which told Lucas she had some experience with riding despite her city origins. She did not complain about the heat or the dust, did not chatter to fill the silence, and Lucas found himself grateful for her quiet competence. Most people made him uncomfortable these days with their questions, or their pity, or their obvious discomfort around his grief. Kathleen seemed content to let him be. Clifton was a small mining town nestled in the steep canyon walls along the San Francisco River. Copper had been discovered in the area a few years back, and the town had grown quickly, though it still had the rough, unfinished quality of most frontier settlements. The main street was lined with false-fronted buildings, a mix of businesses catering to miners and ranchers. Lucas led Kathleen to the livery stable first, where they could leave the horses, and then to the assayer's office, where most people could direct newcomers to property locations. The assayer, a wiry man named Tom Fletcher, looked up from his scales when they entered. "Lucas," he said with surprise. "Have not seen you in town for a while." "Tom," Lucas acknowledged, "this is Miss Edwards. She inherited property from her uncle. We need to locate it." Tom's eyes lit with interest as he looked at Kathleen. "Edwards? You would be Henry Edwards's niece then. I heard he passed. My condolences." "He was a good man." "Thank you," Kathleen said. "I never had the chance to know him well. He left Philadelphia when I was a child, but I am grateful for his generosity." Tom pulled out a large ledger and flipped through pages. "Let me see here." Henry Edwards owned a house on the north end of town and about 40 acres just outside the town limits. The house has been empty since he died last December. Should still be in decent shape. He kept things well maintained. "Can you show me where it is?" Kathleen asked. Tom drew a rough map on a piece of paper, marking the streets and landmarks. "It is the white house with the green shutters about 3 blocks north of the church. Cannot miss it. As for the land, that is about a mile west of town, following the river road. Henry was starting to build something out there, though I do not know if he ever finished." Kathleen took the map, studying it carefully. "Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. I appreciate your help." Lucas waited while she examined the map, then said, I will take you to the house. Make sure it is livable." "You have already done more than enough," Kathleen protested. "I am sure I can find it from here." "It is on my way," Lucas lied. His ranch was in the opposite direction, but something he could not name made him reluctant to simply leave her alone in a strange town. Maybe it was the memory of Margaret, who had always insisted on helping others. Maybe it was just habit, the ghost of the man he used to be asserting itself. Whatever the reason, he found himself waiting for Kathleen to gather her belongings and follow him back out into the afternoon sun. The house was exactly where Tom had indicated, a modest single-story structure with a covered porch and those distinctive green shutters. It sat on a corner lot with a small yard that had once been tended, but now showed signs of neglect. Lucas helped Kathleen carry her trunk inside, and they found the interior dusty but intact. 2 bedrooms, a main living area with a fireplace, and a kitchen with a cast iron stove. The furniture was simple but functional, covered with sheets that Kathleen began pulling off immediately. "It is perfect," she said, and Lucas could hear genuine pleasure in her voice. "I was worried it might be falling apart or that I would arrive to find squatters living here. Small towns like Clifton, people generally respect property rights," Lucas said. He moved to check the fireplace, making sure the flue was clear. "You will want to get wood stocked before winter. Winters here are not as harsh as Philadelphia, but they are cold enough, especially at night." Kathleen nodded, pulling a sheet off what turned out to be a rocking chair. Dust motes swirled in the afternoon light streaming through the windows. "Mr. Whitmore, I cannot thank you enough for your help today. I do not know what I would have done if you had not come along." "Someone would have helped eventually," Lucas said, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "The wheel will need to be replaced. I can arrange for that if you like. My ranch hand knows a wheelwright in Mornsey." "I can pay," Kathleen said quickly. "I do not expect charity." "I did not think you did," Lucas replied. He moved toward the door, suddenly eager to leave. Being in this house with Kathleen, helping her settle in, felt too much like caring, and caring led to loss. He had learned that lesson thoroughly. "I should get back to my ranch. Cattle do not tend themselves." Kathleen followed him to the door. "Will you at least let me make you dinner sometime?" "To thank you properly." Lucas paused on the porch, his back to her. Every instinct told him to refuse, to cut this connection before it could develop into anything resembling friendship. But he heard himself say, "Maybe," which was not a yes, but was not quite a no either. He rode back to his ranch, as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that Margaret had always loved. Lucas tried not to think about the way Kathleen's eyes had lit up when she saw the house, tried not to remember how good it had felt to be useful to someone again, tried not to acknowledge the tiny crack that had formed in the wall he had built around his heart. The next few days fell into Lucas's usual routine. He rose before dawn, tended the cattle, mended fence where needed, and avoided human contact as much as possible. But he found his thoughts drifting to Kathleen more often than he liked, wondering how she was settling in, whether she had figured out the quirks of that old stove, whether she had met any of the other townspeople. He told himself it was simple courtesy, the concern any decent person would have for a newcomer. He almost believed it. On Saturday, Lucas rode into town to pick up supplies and check on the wagon wheel situation. The wheelwright in Mornsey had agreed to repair it for a reasonable price, and Lucas had already arranged for one of his ranch hands to bring the wagon in. He told himself he was just being efficient, taking care of business that needed handling anyway. The fact that it gave him an excuse to stop by Kathleen's house was purely coincidental. He found her in the yard, wearing a simple work dress with her sleeves rolled up, attacking the overgrown garden with a determination that would have been admirable if it had not been so clearly futile. The weeds had taken over completely, and she was fighting a losing battle with a rusty hoe that looked older than she was. "You are going to break that before you make any progress," Lucas said from the gate. Kathleen looked up, her face flushed from exertion. "Mr. Whitmore, I did not hear you arrive. You were too busy declaring war on those weeds." Lucas dismounted and walked over to examine her handiwork. She had managed to clear about 2 square feet in what he estimated had been at least an hour of work. "You need better tools and probably some help. This garden has not been tended in months." "I am discovering that," Kathleen said, wiping sweat from her forehead. "My uncle apparently had a green thumb. There are vegetable beds under all these weeds, and I think that might have been a rose bush before it turned into a thorny monster." Lucas looked at the garden with a critical eye. With proper care, it could be productive again. Margaret had loved gardening, had spent hours tending their vegetables and flowers. He had let their garden go to seed after she died, unable to bear the reminder. "I have tools at the ranch that would make this easier," he heard himself say. "And my ranch hand's daughter has been looking for extra work. She is strong and knows her way around a garden." "I could not ask you to do that," Kathleen protested, but Lucas could see the hope in her eyes. "You did not ask, I offered." He moved toward his horse. "I will bring Maria by tomorrow if she is willing. As for payment, maybe that dinner you mentioned." Kathleen smiled, and it transformed her face from pretty to genuinely beautiful. "Tomorrow evening, then. I should warn you, I am still learning how to work that stove, so I cannot promise anything fancy." "I am not particular," Lucas said, and it was true. Food was fuel, nothing more. He had not tasted anything properly since Margaret died. The next day, Lucas arrived with Maria Gonzalez, a sturdy girl of 19 who jumped at the chance to earn extra money. She took one look at the garden and rolled up her sleeves with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Lucas left them to discuss terms and headed to the general store to pick up the supplies he actually needed. But he found himself finishing his errands faster than usual, and when the afternoon stretched long, he realized he was looking forward to dinner in a way he had not looked forward to anything in 3 years. Kathleen's house smelled of roasting chicken when Lucas knocked on the door that evening. She answered wearing a clean dress, her hair pulled back neatly, and for a moment, Lucas felt something stir in his chest that might have been appreciation, or might have just been indigestion from skipping lunch. "Come in," Kathleen said, stepping aside. "I hope you are hungry. I might have made too much food." The table was set simply but carefully, with mismatched plates that had probably belonged to her uncle and wildflowers in a mason jar serving as a centerpiece. It struck Lucas that this was the first time he had eaten dinner with someone since Margaret died. He usually ate standing up at the kitchen counter or sitting alone at a table meant for 2. "It smells good," he said, because it seemed like the right thing to say. They sat down, and Kathleen served the meal with an efficiency that suggested she was more comfortable cooking than she had let on. The chicken was well prepared, accompanied by potatoes and carrots that must have come from the general store since her garden was not yet producing. "So," Kathleen said as they began eating, "tell me about Clifton. What should I know about my new home?" Lucas considered the question. "It is a mining town, mostly copper. Population may be 600, though it fluctuates depending on how the mines are doing. Winters are cold, summers are hot. Water comes from the river, which is reliable. People here are rough but generally honest. Keep your doors locked anyway." "That is the practical assessment," Kathleen said with a slight smile. "What about the people? Who should I know? Who should I avoid?" Despite himself, Lucas found the corner of his mouth twitching upward. Sheriff Dawson is fair, Doc Miller is competent, mostly sober. Reverend Hastings at the church means well but talks too much. Stay away from the miners when they first get paid. They drink too much and get rowdy. Noted, Kathleen said. She paused, then asked carefully, "And what about you? What should I know about Lucas Whitmore?" The question hung in the air between them. Lucas set down his fork, his appetite suddenly gone. "Not much to know. I have a ranch. I raise cattle. I keep to myself." "I heard in town that you are a widower," Kathleen said softly. "I am sorry for your loss." Lucas felt his jaw tighten. "It was 3 years ago." "Grief does not follow a timeline," Kathleen said, and something in her voice made Lucas look up. Her green eyes held understanding, not pity. "I lost my husband 2 years ago. Pneumonia. We had only been married for 8 months. The revelation settled over the table like a blanket. Lucas studied Kathleen with new eyes, seeing the shadows beneath her calm exterior, recognizing the signs of someone who had learned to carry pain quietly. "Is that why you came west? To start over?" "Partly," Kathleen admitted. Philadelphia held too many memories. Every street corner, every shop, everywhere we had walked together. When the letter came about my uncle's property, it felt like a sign, a chance to become someone new, somewhere nobody knew me as the sad young widow. "And how is that working out?" Lucas asked. Kathleen laughed, a sound that was both bitter and amused. "I have been here less than a week, and I have already told the one person who has shown me kindness, so not as well as I planned." They finished the meal in more comfortable silence, the shared understanding of loss creating a bridge between them. Lucas found himself relaxing slightly, the tightness in his chest easing just a fraction. When Kathleen brought out apple pie for dessert, he did not protest, even though he normally avoided sweets. "This is good," he said after the first bite, and realized with surprise that he actually meant it. He could taste the cinnamon and the tartness of the apples, flavors registering in a way they had not for years. "My mother's recipe," Kathleen said. "One of the few things I brought from Philadelphia. Some memories are worth keeping." As the evening drew to a close, Lucas helped Kathleen clear the table, his hands remembering the domestic rhythm of washing dishes alongside another person. It felt strange and familiar and painful and comforting all at once. At the door, he paused, hat in hand. "Thank you for dinner," he said. "And for understanding about Margaret. I do not talk about her much." "Thank you for listening about James," Kathleen replied. "I have not said his name out loud in months. It felt good." Lucas nodded and stepped out into the night. The stars were bright overhead, the same stars that had shone down on his wedding to Margaret, on their brief happy years together, on the day he buried her. But tonight, they seemed a little less accusatory, a little less like silent witnesses to his failure to protect the woman he loved. Over the following weeks, Lucas found himself in town more often than he had been in 3 years combined. He told himself it was practical, that he needed supplies or had business to conduct, or was checking on the progress of Kathleen's wagon wheel. But the truth, which he acknowledged only in his most honest moments, was that he wanted to see Kathleen. She had become something unexpected, something he had thought he would never have again. A friend. They fell into an easy pattern. Lucas would stop by when he was in town, and they would talk while she worked on her house or garden. Maria had made excellent progress clearing the overgrown beds, and Kathleen had thrown herself into planting with enthusiasm. She asked Lucas's advice about vegetables that grew well in Arizona heat, about how to manage water from the river, about which neighbors might be willing to trade goods. In return, Lucas found himself sharing stories about ranching, about the land, about the challenges of making a living in the Arizona territory. He did not talk about Margaret, and Kathleen did not mention James, but their shared grief was a constant undercurrent, shaping their interactions in subtle ways. They understood each other's silences, respected each other's boundaries, and slowly, carefully, began to rebuild the parts of themselves that loss had hollowed out. One afternoon in June, Kathleen mentioned wanting to see the land her uncle had left her outside town. Tom at the assayer's office said there was some kind of building out there. I should probably inspect the property, see what I actually own. I can take you, Lucas offered. It is rough country and you should not go alone. They rode out on a Saturday morning, following the river road west. The land was beautiful in a harsh way, all red rock and sparse vegetation, with the river running cool and clear below steep canyon walls. Kathleen's 40 acres sat on a relatively flat mesa overlooking the water, and her uncle had indeed been building something. A small cabin, about half finished, with sturdy walls and a roof that needed work. He was building a home, Kathleen said, walking through the structure. I wonder why when he already had the house in town. Lucas examined the construction. Henry Edwards had known what he was doing. The walls were solid, the foundation well laid. Maybe he wanted somewhere quiet, somewhere away from the noise of town. Kathleen stood in the doorway, looking out at the view of the river and mountains beyond. It is beautiful here, peaceful. It is isolated, Lucas countered. Living out here alone would be hard, especially for a woman. Kathleen turned to him, that stubborn jaw setting in the way Lucas had come to recognize. I'm getting tired of people telling me what would be hard for a woman, as if being a woman makes me incapable of handling difficulty. That is not what I meant, Lucas said, though he realized it was exactly what he had implied. I just meant it is different than town. You would need to haul water, worry about wildlife, be prepared for emergencies without immediate help. Like living on a ranch, Kathleen said pointedly. Which you do alone. Lucas conceded the point with a slight nod. Fair enough, but I grew up in this country, I know how to handle it. Then maybe you could teach me, Kathleen said, instead of assuming I cannot learn. They stood looking at each other in the half-finished cabin, and Lucas felt something shift between them. It was not quite an argument, but it was the first real friction they had encountered. And somehow, the fact that Kathleen was willing to push back against him, to defend herself rather than simply accepting his judgment, made him respect her even more. I could do that, he said finally, if you are serious about maybe living out here eventually. I am serious about learning to take care of myself, Kathleen replied. Whether I live here or in town, I want to be capable. I never want to be helpless again. There was a story behind those words, Lucas knew. Something that had happened in Philadelphia, something that had taught Kathleen about vulnerability in ways that went beyond losing her husband. But he did not push, just nodded and said, "All right, I will teach you what I can." They started the next week. Lucas showed Kathleen how to shoot, taking her out to his ranch with an old rifle and setting up targets. She had never fired a gun before, and the first few attempts were dismal, but she listened to his instructions and kept trying. By the end of the first session, she could at least hit the target more often than not. Not bad, Lucas said, surprised by her progress. You have a steady hand. I used to paint, Kathleen said, lowering the rifle. Before James died, portraits and landscapes. I sold a few pieces to galleries in Philadelphia. The steadiness comes from holding a brush for hours. It was one of the few personal details she had shared about her life before Arizona, and Lucas found himself curious. You still paint? Kathleen shook her head. I left my supplies behind when I came west. It seemed like part of my old life, something that did not fit anymore. Lucas understood that impulse, the need to leave behind pieces of yourself that reminded you of happier times. He had burned most of Margaret's clothes after she died, unable to bear seeing them in the closet. It was only later that he regretted it, wished he had kept something that smelled like her, some tangible reminder beyond photographs and memories. "Maybe you will pick it up again someday," he said. "Maybe," Kathleen agreed, but she sounded doubtful. The shooting lessons became a regular occurrence, and Lucas added other skills. Basic horse care, how to read signs of changing weather, where to find water in dry country, how to treat common injuries and illnesses. Kathleen absorbed everything like a sponge, her Philadelphia education combining with her natural intelligence to make her a quick study. Lucas found himself looking forward to their lessons, enjoying the role of teacher, appreciating her questions and her determination. But it was more than just teaching, and Lucas knew it even as he tried to deny it. He was spending time with Kathleen because he enjoyed her company, because she made him feel something other than numb, because when he was with her, the weight of his grief felt slightly less crushing. It terrified him. Caring about someone meant risking loss again, and Lucas was not sure he could survive another loss. July brought scorching heat to the Arizona territory, the kind that made midday work nearly impossible. Lucas adjusted his schedule, working early mornings and late evenings, resting during the worst heat of the afternoon. On a particularly brutal day, he rode into Clifton to escape his own thoughts and found Kathleen on her porch, fanning herself with a folded newspaper. "Too hot to exist," she said by way of greeting. "I am melting." Lucas dismounted and joined her in the shade of the porch. "You get used to it. Do you, really? Or do you just lie to yourself until winter comes?" Despite himself, Lucas laughed. It was a rusty sound, unpracticed but genuine. "Maybe a bit of both." Kathleen smiled at his laughter, her eyes lighting up. "I like that sound. You should do it more often." Lucas felt his defenses rising. "I do not have much to laugh about." "Neither do I," Kathleen said gently, "but I am trying to find reasons, even small ones. Even just the absurdity of moving to the desert and complaining about heat." They sat in silence for a while, the heat pressing down like a physical thing. Lucas found his mind drifting to Margaret, wondering what she would think of Kathleen, whether she would approve of this tentative friendship. Margaret had always been generous, always wanted Lucas to be happy. In his more rational moments, he knew she would not want him to spend the rest of his life alone and miserable. But guilt was not rational, and loss did not follow logic. "Tell me about your ranch," Kathleen said eventually. "I've been taking lessons there for weeks, but you have never really talked about it. How long have you had it?" "My father started it," Lucas said. "I grew up on that land. When he died, I inherited it, married Margaret a year later and brought her home to the ranch. We had 6 years together before." He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "Before she was taken from you," Kathleen completed softly. "Too soon and too suddenly." "Yes," Lucas said, grateful she understood without him having to explain. "What about you and James? How did you meet?" Kathleen's expression grew distant, remembering. "At an art exhibition. He was a banker, not particularly interested in art, but his firm had sponsored the event. He stood in front of one of my paintings for 20 minutes, just staring at it. Finally, I asked him what he saw. He said he saw hope. We were married 4 months later." "That is fast," Lucas observed. "When you know," Kathleen said. "Or at least I thought we did. Maybe if we had more time, we would have discovered we were completely incompatible, but we did not get that chance. All I have are 8 months of memories, and a lifetime of wondering what might have been." Lucas understood that too. The way loss froze a relationship in amber, preserving it perfectly but also preventing it from growing or changing. Margaret would always be 26 in his mind, always healthy and vibrant, never aging, never evolving. It was both a blessing and a curse. As summer deepened, Lucas realized he was in trouble. His feelings for Kathleen were growing beyond friendship, developing into something he had sworn he would never allow himself to feel again. He caught himself watching her when she was not looking, noticing the way sunlight caught in her hair, the sound of her laugh, the determined set of her shoulders when she faced a challenge. He thought about her when he was alone at the ranch, wondered what she was doing, whether she was happy, whether she ever thought about him. It was torture. Lucas had built his entire existence around not feeling, around keeping the world at a safe distance where it could not hurt him. Kathleen was demolishing that carefully constructed wall brick by brick, and he did not know how to stop it. He considered ending the friendship, stopping his visits, cutting her off completely. But the thought of not seeing her, of returning to the absolute isolation he had maintained for 3 years, felt unbearable. The crisis came in August. Lucas was in town picking up supplies when he heard shouting from the direction of Kathleen's house. He dropped his packages and ran, his heart pounding with a fear he had not felt since the day Margaret was shot. He found Kathleen on her porch, facing down a drunk miner who was insisting she owed him money. "I have never seen you before," Kathleen was saying, her voice steady despite the obvious tension. "I do not owe you anything. You need to leave." "Your uncle owed me," the miner slurred. "Borrowed $50 and never paid it back. Debt passes to family." "Even if that were true, which I doubt, debts do not work that way," Kathleen said. "Now please leave before I call the sheriff." The miner lunged forward, grabbing Kathleen's arm. Before Lucas even realized he was moving, he had crossed the yard and pulled the man away, shoving him hard enough to send him stumbling into the dirt. "The lady asked you to leave," Lucas said, his voice cold and dangerous in a way it had not been since the day he hunted down the men who killed Margaret. "I suggest you listen." The miner looked at Lucas, seemed to calculate his chances, and thought better of it. He scrambled to his feet and retreated, muttering curses under his breath. Lucas watched until he disappeared around a corner, then turned to Kathleen. She was pale but composed, rubbing her arm where the miner had grabbed her. "Are you hurt?" Lucas asked, his heart still racing. "I am fine," Kathleen said, but her voice shook slightly. "Thank you for intervening. I think I could have handled it, but I am glad I did not have to." Lucas wanted to pull her into his arms, wanted to hold her until his heart stopped pounding, wanted to make sure she was truly safe. The intensity of the feeling shocked him. You should not have to handle things like that alone. "I am alone," Kathleen said simply. "That is the reality. I need to be able to take care of myself." "You do not have to be alone," Lucas said, and the words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Kathleen looked at him, really looked at him, and Lucas saw the exact moment she understood what he was saying. Her eyes widened slightly and a flush crept up her neck. "Lucas." "I am not saying anything," Lucas said quickly, retreating from the intimacy of the moment. "Just that you have friends here. You have me. If you need help." But they both knew he had been saying more than that, and the knowledge changed something between them. The easy friendship they had built over the summer suddenly felt complicated, charged with possibilities that were both exciting and terrifying. Lucas made excuses and left, riding back to his ranch in a state of confused agitation. He had as good as declared his feelings, had let Kathleen see past his carefully maintained walls. It was a mistake. She would expect things from him now, would want more than he could give. He should stay away, should let the friendship die before it could become something that would inevitably end in loss and pain. But even as Lucas thought these things, he knew he would not stay away. He could not. Kathleen had awakened something in him that had been dormant since Margaret's death, some fundamental need for connection and companionship. It felt like betraying Margaret's memory, but it also felt like finally breathing again after drowning for 3 years. 2 days later, Kathleen showed up at his ranch. Lucas was mending tack in the barn when he heard a horse approaching and looked up to see her riding toward him with purpose. She dismounted without waiting for an invitation and walked straight into the barn. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. Lucas set down the leather he had been working on. "All right. You have been avoiding me since the incident with the miner," Kathleen said. "And I understand why. What you said, what you implied, it scared you. It scared me too." "Kathleen, I should not have said anything," Lucas started, but she cut him off. "Let me finish," she said firmly. "I came to Arizona to start over, to leave my grief behind and become someone new. I was not looking for romance or companionship beyond friendship. I thought I was done with love, that losing James had broken something in me that could not be fixed." Lucas felt his chest tighten. This was her gentle rejection, her way of letting him down while preserving their friendship. He braced himself for it. "But then I met you," Kathleen continued, "and you understood in ways no one else could. You did not treat me like fragile china or try to fix me or expect me to be over my loss on some arbitrary timeline. You just accepted me as I was and let me do the same for you. And somewhere along the way, I started feeling things I did not expect to feel again." Lucas stared at her, not quite believing what he was hearing. "You have feelings for me." "I think I might," Kathleen admitted, her cheeks flushing. "Unless I am completely misreading this situation, in which case I am going to be deeply embarrassed." "You are not misreading it," Lucas said, his voice rough. "I have feelings for you too, but Kathleen, I am not sure I can do this. The thought of caring about someone again, of risking that kind of loss, it terrifies me." "It terrifies me too," Kathleen said. "But I am tired of letting fear control my life. I am tired of just existing instead of living. Are not you?" Lucas thought about the last 3 years, the empty routine, the numbness that had become his constant companion. He thought about the past few months with Kathleen, the way colors had seemed brighter, food had tasted better, the sun had felt warmer on his skin. He thought about the alternative, returning to that gray existence, and found he could not bear it. "Yes," he said quietly, "I am tired of it." Kathleen stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "So what do we do about it?" Lucas reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. Her fingers were small and strong in his, calloused from garden work and learning to shoot. "We take it slow," he said. "We do not rush. We give ourselves permission to be scared and to make mistakes and to figure this out as we go." "I can do that," Kathleen said, squeezing his hand. "Can you?" "I can try," Lucas said, and meant it. They stood in the barn holding hands like nervous teenagers, and Lucas felt a fragile hope unfurling in his chest. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, this feeling of possibility, of maybe, of perhaps. He was not betraying Margaret by allowing himself to care for Kathleen. He was honoring her by choosing to live again, by opening himself to joy even knowing it came with the risk of pain. The courtship, if it could be called that, was tentative and unconventional. They continued their lessons, but now there was an awareness between them, a recognition of attraction that colored their interactions. Lucas found excuses to touch Kathleen's hand when showing her how to hold a rifle, stood closer than strictly necessary when pointing out landmarks from her property. Kathleen brought him dinner at the ranch, staying to eat with him in the house he had shared with Margaret, and Lucas found that the memories did not hurt quite as much with her there. They talked more openly about their late spouses, sharing stories and memories without the fear that it meant they were not moving forward. Lucas told Kathleen about Margaret's love of gardening, her terrible singing voice, the way she always burned toast. Kathleen told him about James's obsession with pocket watches, his habit of reading 3 newspapers every morning, how he had proposed during a rainstorm because he could not wait for better weather. "You think they would approve?" Kathleen asked one evening as they sat on Lucas's porch watching the sunset. "Of us?" Lucas considered the question seriously. "Margaret was generous and kind. She would want me to be happy, but I think she would also be jealous, even if she would never admit it. She was human. James would probably make a joke about how I always did prefer the strong, silent type," Kathleen said with a sad smile. "But yes, I think he would want me to move on. He said once, near the end when he knew he was dying, that he did not want me to spend my life alone. I told him not to talk like that, but I think he needed to say it. Margaret did not get the chance to say anything like that," Lucas said quietly. "She died in minutes. One moment she was laughing about something, the next she was gone. I never got to tell her goodbye." Kathleen reached over and took his hand. They sat like that as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and pink, holding on to each other in shared grief and shared hope. September brought cooler temperatures and a new ease to Lucas and Kathleen's relationship. They were not quite lovers, not yet, but they were more than friends. Lucas found himself thinking about the future for the first time in years, imagining possibilities beyond just surviving day to day. He caught himself wondering what Kathleen would look like in a wedding dress, then immediately felt guilty for the thought. It was too soon, too fast, too much. But Kathleen seemed to be having similar thoughts. One afternoon, when Lucas stopped by her house, he found her standing in front of a small canvas, paintbrush in hand. She had set up an easel on the porch and was working on a landscape of the view from her uncle's land. "You are painting again," Lucas said, surprised and pleased. Kathleen looked up, a smudge of blue paint on her cheek. "I went to Tucson last week and bought some supplies. I realized I missed it, that I had let grief take away something I loved. I do not want to do that anymore." Lucas walked closer to examine the painting. It was rough still, clearly a work in progress, but he could see the skill in the brushstrokes, the way she captured the quality of light on the red rocks. "It is beautiful. It is getting there," Kathleen said. "I am rusty, but it feels good to be creating again." She set down the brush and turned to face him fully. "Lucas, I have been thinking about something." "What is that?" "The cabin on my property. My uncle's unfinished building. I want to complete it, turn it into something livable, and I was wondering if you would help me." Lucas understood immediately that she was asking for more than just physical help with construction. She was inviting him to literally build something with her, to invest time and energy in a future that included both of them. It was a big step, one that required trust and commitment and hope. "I would like that," he said. "When do you want to start?" They began work the following week. Lucas brought tools and materials from his ranch, and they spent their weekends working on the cabin. The structure was sound, as Lucas had noted before, but it needed a roof, windows, and interior work. They labored side by side, and Lucas found a satisfaction in the work that went beyond simple construction. He was building something with Kathleen, creating a space that might someday be a home. As they worked, they talked about everything and nothing. Kathleen told him about growing up in Philadelphia, about her parents who had died when she was young, about the aunt who raised her and taught her to be independent. Lucas shared stories about learning to ranch from his father, about the land he loved, about his hopes for the future of his herd. They debated silly things like the best kind of pie and serious things like territorial politics and statehood. One Saturday in October, they were taking a break from roofing work, sitting on the partially completed cabin floor and passing a canteen of water back and forth when Kathleen said, "I love you." The words fell into the afternoon like stones into still water, creating ripples that spread outward in all directions. Lucas froze, the canteen halfway to his mouth. He looked at Kathleen and saw she was watching him with a mixture of fear and determination. "You do not have to say it back," she continued quickly. "I know this is complicated and scary and we are both still figuring things out, but I realized I did not want to keep it inside anymore. I love you, Lucas. I did not think I would ever love anyone again, but I do. I love you." Lucas set down the canteen carefully. His heart was pounding and he felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to either fall or fly. "I love you too," he heard himself say, and as soon as the words were out, he knew they were true. He loved Kathleen. Somewhere between first meeting her on that dusty road and building this cabin with her, he had fallen completely and irrevocably in love. "God help me. I love you." Kathleen's face broke into a radiant smile, and then she was kissing him, her lips soft and urgent against his. Lucas pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her as he returned the kiss with all the pent-up longing and fear and hope that had been building for months. It felt like coming home and setting out on a journey at the same time, familiar and entirely new. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lucas rested his forehead against Kathleen's. "I am still scared," he admitted. "So am I," Kathleen said, "but I am more scared of not taking this chance, of letting fear stop me from being happy." "We will figure it out together," Lucas said, and believed it. The next few months were a blur of joy and adjustment. Lucas and Kathleen became an official couple in the eyes of Clifton, attending church together, being invited to social gatherings as a pair, navigating the small-town gossip that came with a widower courting a widow. Some people thought it was too soon, that they should have mourned longer. Others were happy to see them finding happiness again. Lucas found he did not much care what people thought. He had Kathleen, and that was enough. They finished the cabin by December, just as the first winter snows began dusting the mountaintops. It was small but well built, with a good fireplace and windows that looked out over the river. Kathleen declared it perfect, and they celebrated by having dinner there, just the two of them, christening the space with laughter and plans for the future. On Christmas Eve, Lucas invited Kathleen to his ranch for dinner. He had spent the day preparing, cleaning the house more thoroughly than he had in years, cooking Margaret's Christmas ham recipe from memory. When Kathleen arrived, she brought a pie and a package wrapped in brown paper. "Merry Christmas," she said, kissing him in greeting. It still gave Lucas a thrill, the casual intimacy of her affection, the way she fit perfectly in his arms. They ate dinner and exchanged gifts. Kathleen had painted him a portrait of his ranch house at sunset, capturing it in a way that made Lucas's throat tight with emotion. He gave her a necklace he had commissioned from a jeweler in Tucson, a simple gold chain with a small turquoise pendant. She put it on immediately, touching it like a talisman. After dinner, as they sat by the fire, Lucas took a deep breath and said, "I have something I need to ask you." Kathleen looked at him, her eyes reflecting firelight. "All right." Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. His hands were shaking, and he felt more nervous than he had ever been in his life. "Kathleen Edwards, I know we have only been courting for a few months, and I know people will say it is too fast, that we have not known each other long enough. But I am 33 years old, and I have already lost one woman I loved. I do not want to waste time pretending I do not know what I want. I want you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build a life with you on this ranch or in that cabin or wherever we decide. I want everything with you. Will you marry me?" Kathleen's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Lucas opened the box to reveal a simple gold band. It was not the same style as Margaret's ring, which was still tucked away in a drawer upstairs. This was new, chosen specifically for Kathleen, representing their future rather than his past. He slipped it onto her finger and it fit perfectly. They were married in February 1885, in a small ceremony at the Clifton Church with just a few close friends in attendance. Kathleen wore a simple cream-colored dress, and Lucas wore his best suit. Reverend Hastings performed the ceremony, and if he got a bit long-winded during the sermon, neither of them minded. They were too busy looking at each other, marveling at the miracle of finding love twice, of getting a second chance at happiness. The wedding night at Lucas's ranch was tender and nervous and perfect. They came together with the knowledge of what they had both lost and the determination to cherish what they had found. Lucas traced the freckles on Kathleen's shoulders and told her she was beautiful. Kathleen ran her hands over the scars on Lucas's chest from years of ranch work and said she loved every part of him. They made love slowly, carefully, learning each other's bodies and boundaries, creating new memories in a bed that had once held only grief. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Kathleen said, "I want children." Lucas felt his heart skip. He and Margaret had tried for years without success, and he had assumed it was his fault, that he was simply not able to father children. "I want that too, but Kathleen, I do not know if I can. Margaret and I never." "James and I did not have children either," Kathleen said. "But we were only married 8 months. Maybe we just did not have enough time, or maybe it did not happen for a reason. Maybe we were always meant to find each other and have children together." "Maybe," Lucas said, wanting to believe it but afraid to hope. They settled into married life with surprising ease. Kathleen moved into the ranch house, bringing her furniture and paintings and all the small touches that turned Lucas's bachelor quarters into a real home. She took over the garden, bringing it back to life with the same determination she had shown with her uncle's property. Lucas taught her the ins and outs of ranching, and she proved to be a quick learner, comfortable with the cattle and skilled with horses. They spent their first year of marriage learning each other's rhythms, compromising on small things and supporting each other through challenges. Lucas discovered that Kathleen was stubborn when she thought she was right, that she sang off-key in the mornings, that she had a temper that flared hot and quick, but burned out just as fast. Kathleen learned that Lucas was quieter when something was bothering him, that he had nightmares sometimes about the day Margaret died, that he showed love through actions rather than words. In the spring of 1886, Kathleen realized she was pregnant. She told Lucas over breakfast one morning, her voice shaking with a mixture of joy and fear. Lucas dropped his coffee cup, and they both laughed and cried as they cleaned up the mess, holding each other in the morning light and marveling at the miracle of new life. The pregnancy was not easy. Kathleen suffered from terrible morning sickness and exhaustion that left her barely able to function some days. Lucas hovered anxiously, remembering how Margaret had talked about wanting children and fought against the fear that something would go wrong. But Kathleen was strong, and with Doc Miller's care, she made it through each milestone. On a cold November night, Kathleen went into labor. Lucas rode hard to bring Doc Miller while Maria stayed with Kathleen, and then began the longest night of his life. He paced outside the bedroom door, listening to Kathleen's cries, feeling utterly helpless. It reminded him too much of waiting while Margaret died, of being unable to do anything to stop the inevitable. But this was not death. This was life. And when Doc Miller finally opened the door, smiling tiredly, and said, "You have a son, Lucas. Both mother and baby are doing fine," Lucas felt his knees go weak with relief. He entered the bedroom to find Kathleen propped up against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face and said, "Come meet your son." Lucas approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the baby. He was red and wrinkled and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists waving in the air. Lucas reached out a tentative finger and the baby grasped it with surprising strength. "What should we name him?" Kathleen asked. They had discussed names during the pregnancy but had not settled on anything definite. Lucas looked at his son and said, "Thomas, after my father." "Thomas Whitmore," Kathleen said, testing the name. "It is perfect." Watching Kathleen with their son, Lucas felt something inside him finally heal. The wound that Margaret's death had left was not gone, would never fully disappear, but it had scarred over, becoming part of his history rather than his present. He had loved Margaret deeply, would always love her, but he loved Kathleen just as much, in a different way that was no less real or profound. And now he loved this tiny person they had created together, loved him with a fierce protectiveness that made his earlier fears about losing people seem almost quaint. Life with a baby was exhausting and wonderful, and terrifying all at once. Thomas was a colicky infant who cried more than he slept, and Lucas and Kathleen took turns walking him around the house at all hours of the night. But he was theirs, and every smile, every milestone, every moment felt like a gift they had not dared to hope for. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Lucas expanded his herd and bought additional land. Kathleen continued painting, creating landscapes that she sold to collectors in Tucson and even as far away as Santa Fe. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable and, more importantly, they were happy. In 1888, Kathleen became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and in the spring of 1889 she gave birth to a daughter they named Rose. She had Kathleen's green eyes and Lucas's dark hair, and Thomas, now 2.5, was initially suspicious of this tiny interloper, but quickly became fiercely protective of his baby sister. The family of 4 settled into a rhythm. Lucas continued ranching with Thomas tottering along behind him, already showing an interest in the cattle and horses. Kathleen painted in the mornings while Rose napped and taught Thomas his letters in the afternoons. They had dinner together every evening, sharing the events of their days, building a life rich with small moments and simple joys. One evening in the summer of 1890, after the children were in bed, Lucas and Kathleen sat on the porch watching the sunset. It had become their ritual, this quiet time together at the end of each day, and Lucas treasured it. He reached over and took Kathleen's hand, lacing their fingers together. "You ever think about what your life would have been like if you had stayed in Philadelphia?" he asked. Kathleen considered the question. "Sometimes. I probably would have remarried eventually to someone suitable my aunt approved of, lived in a nice house in the city, attended the right social functions, painted as a hobby rather than a profession. It would have been a good life, I think." "Comfortable? But," Lucas prompted, hearing the unspoken word. "But it would not have been this," Kathleen said, gesturing to encompass the ranch, the mountains in the distance, the life they had built. "It would not have been us, and I cannot imagine anything better than what we have right now." Lucas pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. "Neither can I." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from orange to purple to deep blue. Lucas thought about the day he had found Kathleen beside her broken wagon, how close he had come to riding past without stopping. He thought about all the small decisions and chance encounters that had led them to this moment, this life, this love. It seemed impossible that happiness could follow such profound loss, and yet here they were, proof that it was possible to survive grief and find joy on the other side. "Lucas," Kathleen said softly, breaking into his thoughts. "Thank you. For what? For stopping that day. For helping me. For teaching me about this land. For loving me even when you were scared to. For giving me this life, these children, this family, for all of it." Lucas felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I should be thanking you. You reminded me what joy feels like. You brought me back to life when I had given up on living. You gave me a future when I thought I only had a past." "We saved each other," Kathleen said simply, and it was true. They had both been drowning in grief, both convinced that happiness was behind them, both merely existing rather than truly living. But they had found each other in the Arizona desert, two broken people who had somehow made each other whole again. The years passed in a blur of seasons and milestones. Thomas grew into a serious boy who loved the ranch and the cattle, already showing signs of becoming the kind of steady, dependable man his father was. Rose was her mother's daughter, artistic and spirited, always asking questions and seeing beauty in unexpected places. In 1892, Kathleen gave birth to another son, Henry, named after her uncle. He was a laughing, easy baby who seemed to find joy in everything. Lucas sometimes caught himself thinking about Margaret, wondering what she would have thought of his life now, whether she would recognize him. He was a different man than the one she had married, shaped by loss and hardship, but also by love and second chances. He hoped she would approve, hoped she was at peace wherever she was, hoped she knew he had not forgotten her even as he had moved forward. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1895, Lucas and Kathleen took a rare trip without the children, leaving them in Maria's capable care for a few days while they traveled to the cabin on Kathleen's property. They had kept it maintained over the years, using it as a retreat, a place to escape and remember where their journey together had truly begun. They spent 3 days there, talking and making love and simply being together without the demands of children and ranch work. On the last evening, as they sat on the porch watching the river flow below, Kathleen said, "I have been thinking about writing a book." Lucas looked at her with interest. "What kind of book? A memoir, maybe, or a novel based on my experiences?" "About coming west, about loss and hope and finding love in unexpected places. I do not know if anyone would want to read it, but I think I need to write it." "I think that is a wonderful idea," Lucas said. "You should do it. Even if it means writing about James, about what I felt when he died." "Especially then," Lucas said firmly. "He was part of your life, part of what made you who you are. I am not threatened by your past, Kathleen. I am grateful for it because it led you to me." Kathleen leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "How did I get so lucky?" "We both got lucky," Lucas corrected. Against all odds, they returned to the ranch renewed and ready to face whatever came next. Kathleen started writing her book, working on it in the mornings after breakfast while Lucas tended the ranch. Thomas, now 9 years old, was becoming a real help with the cattle, and Rose, at 6, was already showing artistic talent that surpassed her mother's at the same age. Henry toddled around getting into everything, a whirlwind of energy and curiosity. In 1897, Arizona Territory was booming. Copper mining continued to expand, bringing new people to the area, and statehood seemed like an increasingly real possibility. Lucas and Kathleen had been married 12 years, and their life felt settled and secure in a way that still sometimes surprised them both. One autumn evening, as they were preparing for bed, Kathleen said, "I have been thinking about something." Lucas, who was pulling off his boots, looked up. "What is that?" "I want to fix up the house in town, my uncle's old place. It has been sitting empty all these years, and I thought maybe we could do something with it. Turn it into a boarding house or rent it out or something useful." Lucas considered the idea. That is not a bad thought. The town keeps growing. There is definitely need for housing. I was thinking, Kathleen continued, sitting on the edge of the bed, that maybe we could give it to Thomas someday, when he is old enough to start his own life. It could be his stake in the future, a place of his own. Lucas felt a surge of love for this woman who was always thinking ahead, always planning for their children's futures. I think that is a perfect idea. They renovated the townhouse over the following year, working on weekends and hiring help when needed. Thomas was fascinated by the construction, and Lucas taught him basic carpentry skills. Rose contributed by painting the shutters, insisting they should be blue instead of green this time. Even Henry helped, mostly by handing tools to his father and older brother, though he probably created more work than he saved. When it was finished, they decided to rent it out rather than let it sit empty. A young couple newly arrived from Kansas took the lease, and the rental income provided a nice supplemental fund for the children's futures. Life continued its steady progression. The children grew, the ranch prospered, and Lucas and Kathleen grew older together with a contentment that felt earned rather than given. They had their challenges. A drought in 1899 tested Lucas's ranching skills, and a particularly harsh winter in 1901 took some of their herd. Rose went through a rebellious phase at 14, and Henry managed to break his arm falling from a horse when he was 8. But they faced everything together, as partners, and somehow that made even the difficulties bearable. In 1903, Thomas turned 17 and announced his intention to attend agricultural college in Tucson. Lucas felt a mixture of pride and loss at the idea of his eldest leaving home, but Kathleen reminded him it was the natural order of things, that they had raised Thomas to be independent and capable, and this was the result of their success as parents. Rose, at 14, was becoming a remarkable artist. She had already sold several paintings, and a gallery in Phoenix had expressed interest in showing her work. She talked about studying art in California or even Paris someday, dreams that seemed both impossible and entirely achievable for this girl who had inherited her mother's talent and determination. Henry, now 11, was still figuring out his path. He loved the ranch but also loved books, could spend hours reading but also wanted to be outside riding horses. Lucas saw himself in Henry's contradictions, remembered being young and trying to figure out where he fit in the world. On a warm evening in May 1905, Lucas and Kathleen celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. The children had organized a surprise party, inviting neighbors and friends, and the ranch house was filled with laughter and music. Lucas stood on the porch at one point, watching Kathleen dance with Thomas, now a tall young man preparing to start his final year at college. Rose was playing fiddle with surprising skill, while Henry ate cake and chatted with the other young people. Sheriff Dawson, who had aged considerably but still held his position, came to stand beside Lucas. "You have a beautiful family, Lucas." "I do," Lucas agreed. "I remember when you first brought Kathleen into town," Dawson said. "You were like a ghost back then." Dead eyes going through the motions. "I did not think anything would ever bring you back to life." Lucas watched Kathleen laugh at something Thomas said, her face alight with joy. "Neither did I." "It is good to see you happy," Dawson said, clapping Lucas on the shoulder. "You deserve it." After the party wound down and the guests departed, after the children finally went to bed, Lucas and Kathleen stood on their porch under the stars, much as they had on countless other nights. But tonight felt special, marking 2 decades of marriage, of partnership, of building a life together. 20 years, Kathleen said wonderingly. When I arrived in Arizona with a broken wagon wheel and no idea what I was doing, I never imagined this. When I found you on that road, I was planning to stay numb and alone for the rest of my life, Lucas admitted. You changed everything. We changed each other, Kathleen corrected, as she always did. That is what love does. It transforms us into better versions of ourselves. Lucas pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, feeling the solid warmth of her body against his. I love you, Kathleen Whitmore. More today than yesterday, less than tomorrow. I love you too, Kathleen said. Always. They stood together under the Arizona stars, two people who had survived loss and grief to find joy and love and family. The ranch stretched out around them, the land they had tended and nurtured, the home they had built. Their children slept safely inside, each dreaming their own dreams, each carrying forward the legacy of resilience and hope that Lucas and Kathleen had forged from their pain. In the distance, a coyote howled and cattle lowed softly in their pens. The river Lucas had known his entire life ran its eternal course, carving through rock and time. The mountains stood silent witness, as they had for millennia, indifferent to human joy and sorrow but somehow offering comfort through their permanence. Lucas thought about the young widower he had been, convinced that happiness was behind him, that the best he could hope for was survival. He thought about Kathleen arriving in Clifton, equally certain that she would live the rest of her life alone, that her capacity for joy had died with James. They had both been wrong, and he was grateful for it every single day. Life would continue its inevitable progression. Thomas would finish college and likely start his own ranch or take over this one eventually. Rose would pursue her art, probably leaving Arizona for bigger opportunities. Henry would find his own path, whatever that turned out to be. There would be weddings and grandchildren, challenges and losses, joys and sorrows. The wheel would keep turning as it always had, as it always would. But tonight, on this anniversary marking 20 years of marriage, Lucas Whitmore stood on his porch with his wife in his arms and felt nothing but gratitude. Gratitude for second chances and unexpected grace, for broken wagon wheels and impulses to help strangers, for love that came when you least expected it and changed everything. The widowed cowboy had given up on happiness, but then she arrived and reminded him what joy feels like again. And in doing so, Kathleen had not just saved Lucas. She had given him back to himself, whole and healed and able to love again. And Lucas had done the same for her, helping her transform from a grieving widow into a woman who painted and wrote and raised a family in the wild Arizona desert. Together, they had built something remarkable from the ashes of their losses. Together, they had proven that endings could become beginnings, that grief could transform into hope, that love could bloom even in the harshest soil. Together, they had created a legacy that would outlast them both, carried forward in their children and their children's children, a testament to the resilience of the human heart and the power of second chances. As they finally turned to go inside, Lucas took one last look at the land he loved, the home he had built twice over, first with Margaret and then with Kathleen. Both women had shaped him, both loves had defined him, and he carried both in his heart without conflict or guilt. He was lucky beyond measure, blessed beyond deserving, and he knew it. The door closed behind them, shutting out the night, and inside, their family slept peacefully. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, but that was tomorrow's concern. Tonight, Lucas Whitmore lay down beside his wife of 20 years, pulled her close, and fell asleep with a smile on his face, finally and completely at peace with the life he had lived and the future still to come. The broken man who had existed before Kathleen was a distant memory, replaced by someone whole and happy and filled with hope. And that, Lucas thought in his last conscious moment before sleep claimed him, was the greatest gift anyone could ever receive.